All right. Hey, we very quickly went live. It feels good when that happens. When it sits and spins for a long time and doesn't connect, that's usually a bad omen for internet issues. So, good morning, Lance Tarchioni here with you on Ask the Agronomist. Producer Heather is in the room at the far end of the long table here because I came home from Orlando with a really nasty summertime cold that we're going to say is nothing more than a nasty summertime cold. But it's been lingering and has made the heat and humidity that much more enjoyable. So hopefully I can avoid a coughing fit here with you this morning. I don't have a cough button, but we'll do what we can. So going solo here this morning. I know we've had several guests here as of late, and I thought about having Rachel come back because we're going to be talking a lot about diseases, and she's my resident fungicide or pathology expert. Her and Jim Donnelly both have a pathology background and are very helpful when we're talking about diseases. And Rachel would be, if Rachel was here, she'd be using fancy terms like polycyclical and sporulation and things like that. So I don't know what those words mean. I've heard Rachel say them, so I repeat them. But anyway, I decided not to pester her. We'll be fine, just you and I here this morning, and got a list of things here that I want to cover. And please, if you have questions, chat them in. It's miserable hot outside already. My glass is fogged up at 6:30 this morning when I walked out of the house, and so just sit tight, enjoy another hour of air conditioning, and we'll get going here. So in no particular order, I'm just going to kind of go down through my list. We'll start off first with crop conditions. So some of us took a long drive to Florida last week and drove through Southern Illinois, and it was good to see what those poor guys are dealing with down there. I knew it would be bad. Frankly, it's worse than I expected. So we drove down, got on 55 at Lincoln, took 55 down to Route 4, jumped on 4, took 4 straight down to 64, got on 64 and took that to Paducah and on into Tennessee. And that stretch by the time you get to Litchfield, things have changed dramatically. So, down to Springfield looks about like it does around here. Really, really, really good. Somewhere between Springfield and Litchfield, it changes pretty abruptly. And then it just keeps getting worse from there. And I've been told by people that know Southern Illinois, I actually haven't seen the worst, because if you would have got off of 64 on 57 and taken 57 south, you would have got into the worst of the worst. But on 64 all the way across Illinois, we saw fields that had not been planted. This was week ago, basically, week 10 days ago. And we saw fields that had just been planted and had another 5 inches of rain on them after they were planted. All the wheat, you could tell it, was not going to be good because it had been too wet. The planted crops generally looked better than the unplanted crops in the bare fields, but they didn't look good either. Lots of holes, lots of unevenness. Everything was late. Everything looked tough. So really feel for the guys in Southern Illinois trying to somehow pull a rabbit out of their hat this year and have something to sell at the end of the year. So as you look around here, we need to be appropriately thankful for how awesomely beautiful this crop looks. Particularly corn. Soybeans are still kind of coming out of their ugly stage. Soybeans are starting to get to that point where you're starting to be proud of how your soybeans look too. Corn has looked really quite spectacular for most of the growing season. Stands are good. Color is phenomenal. I've had a couple people tell me they're not sure they've ever seen corn this green before. I think we really had we had really dry soils at planting time, which is great to keep us from doing all the dumb stuff that we usually do. I saw very few wheel tracks showing up and traffic patterns showing up in cornfields. typically you can find your pinch rows. You can see your wheel tracks where you pulled your vertical till tool or your field cultivator or your soil finisher through the field ahead of planting to open the soil up and dry it out, like we sometimes do, and put in some compaction. We've actually had quite a bit of root lodging and some recent wind events because there's actually not enough compaction in the ground to help hold the corn plant up, because the soil is so mellow. It was so mellow this spring. I had a lot of guys asking me, well, why is the soil so mellow this spring? What's up with that? Was that the winter? What was that? I said, well, no, it's dry. We had really, really good planting conditions this spring, and it's hard to, screw some stuff up when we have planting conditions as good as we did. So, we dodged the bullet with the rootless corn. We talked about that on previous episodes. We were dry through a lot of April and May. About a month ago, we kind of flipped the switch, and it seems like here, over the last 30 days, we've gotten rain about every time rain was forecasted. We've had a tremendous amount of humidity. We've had perfect conditions for fungal disease development, and that will dominate part of the conversation here today, is how we're going to manage the potential for fungal disease from here on out in our corn and soybeans, and probably a little more of a focus on corn because of your interest in tar spot. So anyway, the moral of the story here is crop looks really good. Who knows how good it's going to be. We got to get through. I mean, July weather is what makes or breaks corn. If it doesn't rain for a month, this crop's not going to be anything special. It is not made yet. We're a long ways away from getting it in the bin. The last 3 years, we've had semi-awful weather in May and June, perfect weather in July and August, and have proven that is the recipe for record yields. So the old saying, dry June makes good corn. I don't disagree with that. I think it's more true that a wet June makes bad corn. And we haven't had a wet June. We've just had a normal June. So June has been fine. It's been plenty wet enough to get tar spot started. And again, we'll talk about that as we get along here. But the June we just went through, and can't believe it's almost done already. What is it, 26? So time we're back again next time on Ask the Agronomist, we'll be a third of the way through July. So I don't know how fast time's going to go when I'm 75, but at 55, it feels like it's going really fast already to me. So, but anyway. So we've got a lot of growing season left to go. June has been, really about perfect for growing conditions. And that's why the corn crop's so green. We didn't lose any nitrogen last fall or over the winter or over the spring. We haven't had a lot of big rains. I think the biggest rain I've had at my place this year is 1.5 inches at one time. We haven't had the 3 and 4 inch rains that other people have suffered through. It's never good to get that much rain at one time. You like to get your rainfall in moderation and when you need it. And that's kind of the growing season that we've had so far. And if that continues and we can manage our diseases, I think the prospects for this crop are great. I was talking to a producer yesterday, farms in the Galesburg area. That area has been blessed with 3 really good crops in a row. And he commented to me, he says, we set a new farm average record in 22. We broke that record in 23, and we broke that record in 24. He has each of the last 3 years set a new farm average yield record. And, that's probably never happened in the history of history before, where you do that 3 consecutive years. And, you would say the odds of doing that a 4th consecutive year, pretty slim. And it makes me nervous as an agronomist. Guys that raise 280 bushel corn are looking at their crop right now going, last year they raised 280 bushel corn. They're looking at their crop right now going, well, this looks better than I remember last year's crop looking. What's this going to make? And I'm thinking, I don't know, 250? Because, something's probably going to happen that keeps us from being better than last year. Hope not, but just to be a realist, we need good rainfall for the next 60 days, and we need to keep this crop healthy for another 60 days. And if that happens, I mean, it's scary good, how good this corn crop and, soybean crop as well could be. So we need to protect that. I know the markets are, also noticing that things look pretty good in the major production areas, and that really pours salt in the wounds of the poor guys in Southern Illinois that are not in a major production area. If you're trying to make a living there, it's a pretty damn major production area to you, but the market doesn't care as much when, places like Missouri and Southern Illinois and Southern Indiana are struggling. They're looking at Central Iowa, Central Illinois, Central Indiana, places like that kind of drive the national average yield. And the places that matter the most to the market look really, really, really good for the most part. So we'll see how that turns out. But so we'll touch on soybeans here a minute while we're talking about growth and development. I mentioned soybeans have kind of turned a corner. These really good lush growing conditions are helping soybeans grow through their ugliness. If you've been frustrated with how your no-till soybeans have looked, I've made a lot of observations in the last few weeks. It's not the lack of tillage that's the issue, it's the residue. If you have seen a field where somebody chopped silage on part of the field or somebody baled corn stalks off part of the field, both Heather and I are livestock people. And, when you remove the residue, or you see a field that maybe half of it burned up in a field fire when somebody had an unfortunate day last fall, anything that removed that residue is making a dramatic difference in the size and the color and the development of soybeans. So, the residue is what we're fighting. And, anything we did to get that residue, chopped up, in contact with soil, decompose. So whether you're using, a decomposition aid, whether you're putting a little bit of fertilizer on in the fall to stimulate the biology of the soil, whether you're running vertical till tool, and even early harvest versus late harvest is making a big difference. You might have noticed this year, whether you're a no-tiller or doing tillage, the last cornfields that you harvested, and especially if they were late planted, late harvested cornfield, that residue was a lot harder to contend with than an early planted, early harvested cornfield. I'm talking about last, fall of 24, just because it had more time to start to break down that residue. And so, managing the residue is going to continue to be a challenge in soybeans, and especially as we insist on planting soybeans early and we insist on putting on a lot of pre-emergent herbicides because we need to. We're going to have to figure out what is the right balancing act between, how much tillage do we do, how do we manage our herbicides, when do we plant our beans, and what should our expectation be for what those beans should look like at a given time. Now, Rachel likes to remind me, and I teased Rachel, might have been I was at a dealer meeting. I was teasing her about this. I do lots of stuff with Rachel. I do dealer meetings with Rachel. I do Ask the Agronomist with Rachel. We enjoy working together. We discovered this week, we were talking about tar spot and fungicides, and we agreed with each other. And that's particularly nice when we agree with each other on things. So both of us like that. It's always a surprise to me when somebody doesn't agree with me. But anyway, that's just me. So that's trouble about telling jokes. When you're old, you forget what you were going to say. So anyway, Rachel and I were talking about soybeans looking ugly, and she reminded people that, it really doesn't matter what they look like. What matters is how they yield, and they're going to be fine. And she's absolutely right about that. Now, just because they're going to be fine, the question is, are they going to yield as much as they would have had they not looked like what for several weeks? And I reminded the audience that we were with that Rachel, is an admitted corn lover and really cares far less about soybeans than she does about corn. And so I said, well, you guys got to take that with a grain of salt because, Rachel doesn't really like soybeans. She's not terribly concerned about what they look like. She wouldn't say that at all about corn. So we do need to do some work. I've actually got some kind of They're not really research trials. They're just side by sides on my own farm, where I'm looking at something that would be a relatively easy thing to change, and that would be row spacing. And I'm going to try to show you some pictures here if I can get them to come up. So that's one of my April planted bean fields at home. I took that picture on Saturday. I'm pretty proud of that field. That's not a bad looking field of no-till soybeans. And as you can see, I've got a 30-inch row versus 15-inch row comparison in this field. And when I was there on Saturday, the 30-inch rows, it doesn't really show up too much in this picture, but the 30-inch rows are a little greener. They are a little more uniform. They've got a better stand. They're about 1 to 1.5 trifoliates bigger than the 15-inch rows. They've got more developed branches, and they've got more blooms on them today. Well, or at least they did on Saturday, than the 15-inch rows do. And that's all just because they got off to a better start. And now that 30-inch row planter had row cleaners on it, which is an advantage to those rows. 30-inch row beans almost always come up better. I hate 30-inch row soybeans, to be honest with you. I don't like cutting them. I don't like planting them. I don't like looking at them. I don't like managing weeds in them. But they do have advantages. And guys that like 30-inch rows, they love the way they come up. They love the way they look. They're just, the planters work better. You've got, less stuff to maintain. You got less stuff to get through the residue. So there are advantages to 30-inch rows if we can get the same or better yield and keep them clean. And so that's what I'm looking at here on, I think, 3 different farms. Basically parts of the field look like the U.S. flag because we got a round of 30s, a round of 15s alternating back and forth. Same bean, same day, same population, same depth, kept everything the same that we could. The only difference is the row spacing. And I hope the 15s kick the 30s ass, but if they don't, well, maybe this old dog needs to think about changing. And maybe when you're no-tilling beans early into heavy residue and trying to manage for high yield early planted soybeans, maybe 15s aren't better, like we've always said. Now, if you look at I got a couple other pictures here. That one makes the 30s look even better in that one. But it's obvious. So we're almost at canopy closure on the 15s. So, we're not wasting much sunlight there. And you look at the hit the wrong button somehow. There. You look at those 30-inch rows. Look at all the sunlight I'm wasting there. What a tragedy. I'm supposed to be harvesting sunlight. Half of the sunlight falling on that field is just falling on the soil, heating my soil up and helping weeds grow and doing nothing good whatsoever. But those are some pretty nice looking plants. They got some nice looking branches on them, and they're doing really well. So we'll see how that turns out. Looks like Tom's got a question there. What is Tom's question? Is there cornfields that seems no leaf center brands? Can this be true? Seems counterintuitive. Good yields with less leaf area. Okay, so Tom's question is about skinny leaves versus fat leaves, basically, in corn. And so Tom raises a good, like me when I ask a question. A lot of times my questions are actually a comment thinly veiled as a question, and so Tom incorporated a comment into his question, which I dearly love, and he asked, seems like if you've got thicker leaves or fatter leaves, you've got more leaf area, and doesn't more leaf area make more yield? And Tom, you're right. More leaf area does make more yield, and if you lose leaf area in corn, you typically sacrifice yield potential. However, just because your leaf is broader doesn't mean you have more leaf area, doesn't mean you're going to intercept more sunlight. And I don't know that I've ever seen a correlation, so like an upright leaf hybrid versus a pendulum leaf, those upright leaves, you could kind of argue that, well, they're not really, wouldn't they catch more sunlight if they were out like this versus like that? Maybe. But I don't know that I've ever seen a correlation in yield potential of germplasm based on leaf architecture, and the leaf area typically is not being reduced or increased by the broadness of the leaf. Some of the broader leafed hybrids we've had have not been better hybrids. I don't spend a lot of time, comparing leaf architecture of different hybrids or leaf width of different hybrids, but they do vary. I one time when I was actually paying attention to that, I've seen hybrids that have leaf widths that vary as much as an inch, and a 5-inch wide leaf compared to a 4-inch wide leaf is pretty noticeable. But I don't think we're reducing the leaf area of the hybrid with a narrower leaf, because it might be longer. Some hybrids have a leaf or two more than other hybrids. So I don't necessarily think that architecture is having that much of an impact. And if you have a broader leafed hybrid that ends up being better than a narrow leafed hybrid, I'm just going to say it's a better hybrid. It's not really better because of the leaf. We don't pay that much attention to that when we breed corn, to be honest with you. We're looking for standability. We're looking for stalk quality. We're looking for tar spot resistance. We're looking for southern rust resistance. We're looking for grain quality. We're looking for, all the stuff that we look for. And then obviously at the top of the list, the first 3, 4, or 5 things are the yield. And so, I don't know that, there are definitely differences, and you can sometimes, and they're pretty consistent. If you've got a hybrid that's got a very upright leaf architecture, it's always going to be that way. If you've got a hybrid with a narrow leaf, it's always going to be that way. If you've got a hybrid that, I've had some before that were not very green compared to other hybrids, and people have wondered, well, that thing's just kind of pale. It's kind of pea green. Corn's supposed to be green. Does that mean it's not a good hybrid? And I don't know that the degree of greenness, has a lot of impact on yield. If a hybrid is used to being light green, it's not suffering from the fact that it's used to being light green. I'm used to looking like this, Tom, and some people might say I should be suffering, but I've gotten used to looking like this, so it's not really bothering me anymore. So I don't think I'd be terribly concerned about leaf width, but leaf area is important, and that's one thing with short corn people wonder about. Well, boy, aren't you losing a lot of leaf area? Nope, leaf area is the same. All we're losing is stalk area, which stalk area doesn't really count for much. So I see we got another question. So thanks, guys. Seeing significantly more K deficiency in field edges, clay. Okay. So question on this time is K deficiency. So I frankly, although I'm starting to see it on the road edges, I drove past some today. I thought about grabbing a leaf, and I thought, nah, you guys have seen that. That's kind of boring. So I did see something on. I'm a little bit of a Craigslist scroller looking for bargains I don't need to buy, and I saw a really nice 10-foot drop seed spreader, fertilizer drop seeder. You could just put fertilizer in it, and it drops straight out of the bottom. It's not a broadcaster; it's just dropping it on the ground. And if you've got I'm going to say a young teen aged child at home that is a hard worker and maybe ambitious and is looking for a business idea other than mowing yards or babysitting or things that other people do, start up a business where you let farmers hire you to drop a 10-foot wide strip of potash around the outside of all their fields, especially the ones that are close to the road. You could probably charge more to do it on those. And that would fix this field edge potassium deficiency that we're dealing with. So, Grant thought that he was seeing more than normal of it. Big picture, I think I've probably seen less than normal of it, but it depends on, rainfall, depends on planting date. I think we had more the previous 3 years because of the dryness. I haven't seen as much sulfur deficiency this year. I haven't seen as much potassium deficiency. The road edge thing is an easy one. I mean, I've taken soil tests to prove this. I've taken tissue tests to prove this. The problem with the field edge is your K test on that field edge is probably about 100. Your base saturation in that spot is probably around 1%. There's nothing wrong with the field edge other than a lack of potash. So, it's the solution to that is just to figure out a way to apply a lot more potash out on the edge of the field. Now, if you're using a spreader truck to put your fertilizer on, the only way to get a full rate of fertilizer to the field edge is to broadcast to the middle of the road. And if your fertilizer supplier is doing that, you're probably going to be frustrated with them because you don't want to fertilize the road and the road ditch. But when the edge of the pattern just goes to the edge of the field, you're only getting about a 25% rate out there in that last 10 feet or so. And I've joked, another idea for some person with some ingenuity would be to figure out how to mount some sort of deflector, like a 4x8 sheet of plywood, right next to the fans on a spreader truck, and you're outside passing around the field, put the tire right on the edge of the field, and just the half of the pattern is basically going to hit that sheet of plywood and just fall right on the edge of the field. And so you make one lap around the outside with that, and that would fix the problem as well. Out in the field, where you're seeing the clay soils, typically clay soils impact potassium availability a couple different ways. They hold nutrients more tightly, they hold water more tightly, and they're harder for roots to grow through. So typically in those clay spots, even if you've got the same soil test level, the availability of that nutrient is not as good, and the roots that are trying to intercept that nutrient are probably not as good. So in those areas, you actually need a better soil test, and it's not actually the soil test, the test level that I look at, it's the base saturation. So I like to have a base saturation of potassium of 3%. There's a lot of acres of corn and soybeans in the state of Illinois growing on soils with base saturations way less than 3%. And that's why we see potassium deficiency all the time. So I know, Grant, I know you well. I know you're not going to like my recommendation of you need more potash, but that's what I think you need. If we've got potassium deficiency showing up in fields where there's nothing wrong with the roots, there's really, there's not a grub problem, there's not a chemical carryover problem, there's not something weird going on, the roots look fine, the plants look fine, I would say look at the base saturation on the soil tests from those areas, and I bet you they're going to be on the low side, maybe in the 1s or low 2s, and base saturations of 1.5 to 2 just are not going to supply a rapidly growing corn crop or a rapidly growing soybean crop with enough potassium to make the plant happy. Now, how much we're going to increase the yield, making the plant happier, that's an arguable point. We do a lot of things for beauty in our society, including us farmers. And just because it looks better doesn't mean it always yields as much more than it looks like it's going to. Nitrogen is a perfect example of that. Your most profitable rate of nitrogen typically looks a little sketchy because it's going to fire. You're going to have nitrogen deficiency, and I've always told guys, if you're at dent in your corn and it's still green to the ground, and you're still thinking, "Damn, that looks good," you're using too much nitrogen because you've just got more there than that plant could justify having. And unless you're trying to win the NCGA yield contest. If you're trying to win a yield contest, then economics kind of go out the door. But if you ever do a nitrogen rate study, the best looking plots and the highest yielding plots will rarely be the best ROI. So, there does come a point there where it doesn't make economic sense to make the plant look beautiful because you're not getting enough additional yield out of it to justify that. So let's see. So then another part of Grant's question: Are use some K on the planter? Thoughts? I'm going to say if you've got a base fertility issue in areas or soil type limitations in areas, that little bit of potassium that was in the starter, probably just not enough to overcome it. It might look worse than it does if that planter application hadn't been there, but obviously what we supplied with the planter wasn't enough to overcome the challenge that soil was going to give. So great questions, guys. Couple loyal followers there. They're always good for questions and great farmers, and appreciate you guys joining us here this morning. So let's get into some weed control stuff. So I may this may be a long episode. We haven't even talked about tar spot yet, and that's all you can. That's I'm doing a little bit of bait and switch on you. You're probably here because you want to know what's going on with tar spot, and I'm talking about all this other stuff that's not even tar spot. So weed control should be done in corn unless you want to spray with some drops. We should be done spraying corn. And now it's time to evaluate. How happy are you with what you got? If you're not happy with it, not much you can do about it now, unless you want to run some drops. I would say at this point, if you're not happy with your corn weed control, can't fix it now. We can just plan ahead to next year and decide what we're going to change. Are we going to use a better pre? Are we going to use a higher rate of pre? Are we going to apply the pre at a different time? Are we going to add something to our post treatment? Are we going to use a higher rate of something in our post treatment? Are we going to mix another mode of action into our post treatment? Are we going to spray our post treatment at a different time? And primarily that would mean earlier. So, those are the levers that we can pull to improve weed control in corn. And I do think we need to strive for the best weed control in corn we can get. Because for all the problems that we have in weed control in corn, it's still easier than weed control in soybeans. And we've got more options today. Now, got new stuff coming in beans that's going to give us more options in beans as well. But, we probably still have more options in corn than we do in beans. And people have noticed that, hey, I think it's a little easier to get weed control in soybeans when I'm following really good weed control in corn. Our conventional soybean growers learned this a long time ago. I've had several conventional guys tell me, yeah, if I'm raising conventional beans, if I've got weedy corn, I'm screwed. So I got to have clean corn to survive getting through that conventional bean year. And the rest of us are, every year it seems as weed control gets a little tougher, we're all getting a little closer to feeling like we're raising conventional soybeans, which is frustrating. But so anyway, that's my recommendations on corn. If you're happy with your program, great. If you're not happy with your program, now's not a bad time to be, based on what you went through this year, talking with your supplier about, hey, what are we going to do different next year? Here's the reality that you need to be prepared for. Anything you do to make your weed control better is going to oftentimes make it more difficult from a management standpoint, and it's going to make it more expensive. So there is no such thing as better, easier, and cheaper. Those three things don't go together. You might get better, equally difficult, more expensive. Those three things might go together. But that's just kind of reality of the situation we're dealing with these days with weeds. So soybeans. So we are in the perfect window right now to be scouting soybeans that were sprayed a couple weeks ago and make your respray decisions today. The weeds you're respraying today might be yay tall. They might be half dead. They might be just starting to regrow. There might be an itty bitty little one there beside it that came up after the post application. But now would be the time to retreat those fields, get those weeds cleaned up right as soybeans are hitting canopy. There will be no need to be respraying soybean fields for weeds in July and August if you do that. There will be no need to be tempted to throw some Roundup and some Liberty in with your fungicide. Hate that. People get stuck doing that, every year. We can get these fields cleaned up now with some on-label applications and keep the herbicide out of the fungicide and keep you guys that make a living as an applicator from respraying soybean fields all damn summer long. So if a respray is going to be needed, you will already know it today if we look at the field. Now, as you do a drive-by, a lot of these sprayed fields look pretty good. Once you get out there and start walking around, okay, there's an undead weed, there's an undead weed, there's a little one, looks like he might have just come up. Respray the field now. There's no reason to wait till those weeds are waist high and the beans are waist high to respray the field. The weeds that are going to need killed in July are already there and can be killed now. So that's my sermon on weed management and soybeans. Let's walk those fields now. Let's make those respray decisions now. Let's get them done. There's no reason to wait. If you walk the field and you can't find a weed nowhere, I'm going to say just let it go. It doesn't need respray. Maybe you can lap the field. Maybe there's a lot of people have commented, the field's fine. It's the field edges that I'm battling. And I think some high management producers are going to start to treat their field border differently than they treat the rest of the field. Maybe that means a planned 2-pass post program just on the border, or maybe it's a higher rate of pre on the border. I don't know what's the most workable solution for you, but the field edge is where the heaviest weed pressure is. The field edge, weeds come up sooner there. So when you post your field, where's the biggest weeds? They're on the edge. Where do we most often need to retreat? On the edge. So treating the edge differently. I spent a lot of time with our colleague Kurt Emkin last week. Kurt's got, I think, a really great idea for corn if anybody would be willing to do it. And you don't need to do it on 120 feet, worth of field edge. I mean, it's probably the outside 30 that, has the problems, maybe 45. So I don't know if you just want to run 2 or 3 boom sections when you're lapping the field, or if you want to have a small sprayer that's just like your field border sprayer. But his idea was put your pre on your field at spike corn, come back with some warrant and a high rated dicamba. You could throw a little atrazine in with it if you wanted to, as long as we don't exceed the maximum label for atrazine. So basically, it'd be like going back to the old marksman days, spraying marksman on spike corn, throw some warrant in with it for some additional residual. Do that on spike corn, just a few weeks after you put your pre down. The field border is going to be essentially clean then. You're not going to be spraying big weeds. There might be some small ones there, but spray that border. You can put Roundup in with it if you wanted to, but you probably wouldn't even have to. And then when you put your regular post program on it, V3 or V4 or V5 or whenever you want to do it, spray the whole field. So that strip around the outside would get the pre, would get the early post pass, and then it would get the normal post pass. So that would be a 3-pass program, but just on the field border. I think that would be a wonderful practice. I know a lot of people, logistically would balk at that. Well, when am I going to have time to do that? How am I going to do that? People that, aren't opposed to using a row crop cultivator sometimes can do things that other people can't handle. So there's lots of options that we can do to be better weed managers. They're just more work, more money, more time, more of things that we already don't feel we have enough of. So those are hard decisions to make. Okay, aphids real quick. So I haven't seen an aphid yet. Heather told me that she talked to somebody the other day that found 1 or 2. No reason to panic if you find 1 or 2. If you want to look for aphids, when you're scouting your corn for fungicides and scouting your corn for tar spot, pull a whirl every now and then on every field you walk into. Unwrap that whirl, and if you can't find aphids in the whirl, you don't need to be worried about aphids. if you find, start finding corn whorls with 20, 30 aphids in them, that might be time to start worrying about aphids. I don't think we're going to have aphids this year, but I can't guarantee you that. The way to put your mind at ease on aphids, because we need to know when they're in the whorl, because when they're in the whorl is when we need to be treating for them, not when they're all over the outside of the plant, all over the tassel. We can kill a lot of aphids then, but we can't protect yield then because the yield's already gone. So we got to know they're there earlier, and we got to be more proactive about treating for them. I would caution you about not just throwing insecticide in with your fungicide just in case you got aphids. Now, if you use a insecticide that controls aphids, that's probably not horrible. It's probably unnecessary, but it's probably not horrible. But throwing in an inexpensive insecticide, which is what we tend to like to do when we put insecticide in with fungicide on your corn, could potentially kill everything but the handful of aphids that are out there. And then that kind of opens up the playing field. You knock back the beneficial insect populations. They take a long time to rebound, and you've just kind of opened the floodgates to let aphids, take over your field. So I would be cautious, and I've had a couple growers who used to think, well, it's good to put insecticide in with fungicide on soybeans. I'll do it on corn too. And I had one guy that he said, I did that for 3 years, and he said it just seemed like we always had a lot more aphids than everybody else. So I quit doing that because I think I might have been creating an aphid problem. So just be aware that when entomologists tell you that you need to be careful using insecticides because that can create aphid problems, that's absolutely true. Because a lot of our popular pyrethroids that are inexpensive and safe and really effective at killing corn rootworm beetles and Japanese, they're moderately effective on Japanese beetles, but that's what we typically go to, when we're putting insecticides on. They're not really effective on aphids. And that is the danger. If you kill everything but the aphids, you actually just made your aphid problem worse. Now, you might have been going to have an aphid problem anyway, but you just speeded it up and made it worse by doing that. So just be aware that is a real thing. I haven't found an aphid so far. It's easier to find tar spot than it is aphids, and so we'll jump into tar spot. So it doesn't matter whether you're tar spot, gray leaf spot, southern rust, whatever kind of a fungus you are. The last 30 days of weather has been perfect for you. The next 30 days worth of weather looks pretty good for you too. We talked about the old saying earlier that dry June makes good corn. I think that's true. It's even more true that a dry June prevents tar spot. And we had 3 years. So 21 was the big tar spot year for Central Illinois. So I'll say a couple things about 21. It was not just tar spot. We had a good amount of crown rot and a good amount of southern rust and a good amount of tar spot. That trifecta is really bad. Most trifectas are good because you're getting a big payout on your bet if you're a gambler. I'm not a gambler, other than I'm a farmer. But the trifecta of tar spot, crown rot, and southern rust is bad for corn. And in situations where we had susceptible hybrids that had a healthy amount of all three of those diseases and were not protected by a fungicide, I documented some yield differences approaching 100 bushel in 2021. 22 came along. We were paranoid that we were going to, couldn't raise corn anymore because of tar spot. 22 crop was very healthy. 23 crop was pretty healthy. 24 crop was pretty healthy. What made the crop healthy those 3 years was a dry May and June. We haven't had a really bad disease year since 21. Trying to keep from devolving into a coughing fit here, and I'm struggling. But anyway, the weather that we've had here lately has been perfect for fungal development. If it doesn't rain, It's humid. Heavy dews that don't dry off till noon. And that's perfect conditions. Now, tar spot, it would be even more perfect for tar spot if it was a little cooler, but the heat alone is not going to prevent it. Oh, bless you. My assistant bringing me a nice water. Coffee's not doing the trick. Maybe water will.
She made you some tea this morning, Lance.
Yeah, I should have had a cough drop or something handy too. That feels better. Thank you. So what are we seeing? What do we do? So Rachel and I had a long conversation the other day about tar spot. She's finding it very easily in Henry, Mercer County. We found it in Warren. I found it in Fulton. I found it in Knox. I mean, it's around. If you find it in your field, you don't really have to tell me that you found it, because it's out there. It's not really news that it's here. The news is kind of when it's here. So in 21, we were able to find it by the 4th of July if we were looking. Most people weren't paying attention in 21. But talking to Kurt and some of our other chemical reps that were, scouting for different things ahead of fungicide applications, found it 4th of July weekend in 2021. So I'm going to say we found it this year in our area almost 2 weeks earlier than we've ever found it before. I couldn't find it at Monmouth last year until well into August. I do a dealer training every 3 weeks at Monmouth, and every time I do one of those trainings, I typically try to go out in the fields and find some stuff to talk about. And I don't remember what the date was, but I mean, I know into August in unsprayed corn at April 15th planted corn that had never been sprayed with a fungicide. No V5, no VT, no nothing. Just nothing. I couldn't find tar spot until the middle of August in that corn last year. And that's just because of the weather. It needs moisture early to get going. And, when it shows up 2 weeks before black layer, it's an ignorable thing. It doesn't have time to hurt you. When it shows up 2 weeks before tassel, that's a different deal. It's got lots of time. Now, it may not have the perfect weather, and we don't know. Maybe it won't get as bad as we think it might. So just because it's here early doesn't guarantee it's going to be a disaster. But when it comes in late, that is a guarantee that it can't possibly be a disaster. So we need to be vigilant. The other thing that's concerning to Rachel and I is we're finding it in small corn as well. So I normally anticipate only being able to find it early in big corn with a dense canopy, but she's found it in some corn that's barely waist high. So one thing I would say, I would scout all your fields just to know where you're at. And if you start finding it in significant levels, and I'll show you a picture of what I mean by insignificant levels. So when I say we're finding it, it's not hurting anything at the level that we're finding it. One of my many spam calls. So you see that little black speck? Right? I can't point to it because I don't know where the damn camera is on the phone. But about right in the middle of the screen there, about in line with my middle finger, is a black speck on that corn leaf. That's a small tar spot lesion. Now, it's not producing spores yet. It's not sporulating. It's going to grow. It's going to get badder. It's like an infection that's going to get worse, and it's going to, help fuel more tar spot. That leaf there, if I can hold it right light, has actually got quite a few more of those little tar spot lesions on it.
No,
That one
have a
didn't.
bit of a glare.
That didn't show up very good.
Oh, now you can see it.
I got one more. That one's got one that's a little bigger on it. And this one, here, oh, I'm missing one. Supposed to have one more here. Anyway, I had one more where you could see the leaf was wet, where there was a bunch of dew on the leaf, and so it was really wet, and I rubbed that lesion to make sure that you couldn't rub it off. You can also lick it and see if it tastes like poop if you want to. That was a I was a little bit of joke, agronomist joke. So I sent those pictures out to Jim Donnelly and Rachel just to kind of confirm, hey, you guys comfortable, with me calling this tar spot? And Jim's first response was, it looks like poop to me, and he was just joking because it's tar spot. And so my reply was, well, it didn't taste like poop. And Rachel's response, was, that makes me want to ask a lot more questions. And so I told her, I said, well, that's because you're a mom. The other two guys on the text were dads, and they just let it go. But mom had to ask some more questions. So anyway, there are things that can look like tar spot on a leaf, and if you can scrape them off with your finger, or you can moisten it and they kind of dissolve and go away, that was something other than tar spot. If you've got black spots on your corn leaves, look low in the canopy. Lower in the canopy is where you're going to tend to find it now. Most of that inoculum is coming off of residue in that field. Now, once it gets going big time and you've got lesions all up and down the corn plant that are sporulating and it's going through its polycyclical cycles and making more spores, and those spores get up in the air, you might find it anywhere on a corn plant later in the season. But when you're finding it early, look down low. That's where you're going to find it. So the fact that it's here is meaningful because we know that infection is occurring every day that you've got the right weather conditions. There's more infection occurring, and tar spot is a disease that you got to stay ahead of it. If it gets ahead of you, you can't really fix that. It's a lot like weeds these days. If weeds get ahead of you, we can't fix the problem anymore because you can't throw that Hail Mary like we used to be able to. So we got to manage the weeds. Well, we need to manage the tar spot. Well, the way you manage the tar spot is being timely with preventative applications. The curative gets overused when it comes to fungicides because if the infection has already occurred, you can't fix it. And so there's a lot of, by the time you can see a tar spot lesion, there's a lot of other infection points that you can't see yet. So if you see one, is there 5 more on that leaf that you can't see yet? Are there 10 more on that leaf that you can't see yet? Are there 100 more on that leaf that you can't see yet? We don't know. But there's more that have been, the one you're seeing the first day you see it, that was the first infection that occurred. You don't really know how many more have occurred after that you can't see yet. So my recommendation, if your corn's close to tassel, I want to wait till we got some tassel there before we make our fungicide applications. I don't personally like spraying corn with fungicide a couple weeks ahead of tassel. That's kind of a no man's land that I don't want to get into. If you like to spray fungicide before tassel, I'd like it done before V14. And unless you planted kind of on the late side or your crop's been growing slow for some reason, your corn's already past V14. So the window to put an early application on has passed for a lot of us. Now, if you've got corn that, has not V14 yet and you're finding tar spot, I might consider getting across it with a ground rig and putting a good fungicide treatment on it before you get past V14. And then you're going to need to spray that field again sometime after pollination. But that's not a bad 2-pass program in years where tar spot gets started this early and it's potentially going to be bad. For most of us, that their corn's far enough along that we don't want to put a fungicide on it right now for risk of arrested ear syndrome and pinched ears and those sort of things that we don't want to see. As soon as we've got some tassel coming out, I want that fungicide applied. You guys that like to wait for brown silk, I'm gonna step on some toes here. I don't like brown silk fungicide applications. they need to be on earlier. If you're going for plant health benefits by brown silk, the plant's already been through the most stressful period of its life. And if you're trying to alleviate stress with strobilurin fungicides, the fungicide needs to be on earlier. If you're trying to prevent diseases like tar spot that get started earlier, the fungicide needs to be on earlier. Even in years where we don't have heavy disease pressure, I don't like waiting until brown silk. There's not a lot of data to support that that's a good idea. That's just an idea people had that sounded good to people, and so it kind of took off. The research that was done on the strobilurin fungicides by Bayer and BSF and Syngenta and the companies that developed the strobies was done at VT to R1. VT to R1 has always been the window, and this brown silk stuff has kind of come about, through some marketing and some sales ideas of some clever people. There's not a lot of science behind waiting to brown silk to put fungicide on corn. I want it on, between tassel and pollination, which is somewhere between tassel and green silk. You don't need to have every tassel out. You don't need to have tassel shedding pollen. You don't have to have your pollination does not have to be complete. Your silks don't have to be out. You just need to make sure that you're at least 2 tassel before you spray your fungicide. And a question. There we go. So Mark Schultz asked a good question. Did the V5 to V7 application buy us some time with tar spot? That's an excellent question, Mark. I'm going to say no. Now, I could be proven wrong, and that V7, that later, I'm going to say that let's talk about a V5. So a V5 that went out when? A month ago? 3 weeks ago? Your traditional V5, the residual that you're going to get out of V5 is days, if anything, not weeks. So, on early April planted corn or on mid-April planted corn that got a V5 on it in, say, the middle of May or even late May, we're now in late June. And if tar spot started infecting 2 or 3 weeks ago, let's say, that would have been well after any residual protection from the V5 would have worn off. Now, if you've been making a separate application on your early vegetative, which I do like doing, a lot of guys don't want to mess with that, but let's say you spray your herbicide at V3 or V4, and that's a great time to post your corn with herbicide, great time to control weeds, great time to be crop safe for corn, not a great time to put a fungicide in because your corn's too small. So let's say you're a better than most manager, and you're willing to make 2 passes in corn, one for your herbicide, one for your fungicide. And so you delay that application to maybe V7, V8, V9, maybe even V10 corn. That application could have bought us some time. Now, it's not going to buy us enough time that I want to wait till brown silk. It just maybe buys us a little bit of time to where we don't have to be out there the day the tassel pokes out at the top of the plant. So Mark, I honestly think when people see a big response from V5, I don't think it's got that much to do with tar spot. Now, there are people that will disagree with me on that, and I'm willing to be proven wrong. And it'll be interesting to see, these fields that did get V5s, V6s, V7s, V4s, whenever that application went on, it'll be interesting to watch those fields and see, do they seem to be staying cleaner longer, or do they not? So I love an early fungicide application in corn, but I've never believed it was an effective, control measure or even delayed the onset of tar spot in corn. It does good things for the plant, and it can increase yield, and it's our most inexpensive fungicide application to make, and it's one that I like making, but I don't think it has anything to do with tar spot. That's my personal opinion. So good questions today, guys. So a little bit more on fungicide applications in corn. So we want to be timely, and timely to me means close to tassel. We want to get good coverage. So whatever you can do to get good coverage, if your aerial applicator is willing to carry a little more water and will charge you an extra, I don't know how much per acre to do that, I would consider it. the first thing I would recommend is whatever product you're using. And I'm not, close your ears, Heather. I'm not just a Delaro salesman here on Ask the Agronomist. You should see the sadness in her pretty face. It's just awful. Whatever fungicide you choose to use, and I hope it's Delaro Complete because they're really good products. Whatever product you use a full label rate. And if you're using something cheap, absolutely use a full label rate. And we won't get into, is a full label rate of cheap better than a standard label rate of expensive? I don't know the answer to that. A full label rate of every product is better than the standard rate of every product. And if we're going into a year where we need our fungicides to be at their best, they need to be timely applied. We need to have good coverage, and you need to have the highest rate you can possibly stand. And I know that gets expensive, but I think this could be a year where getting the rate up is well worth doing. And then probably the hardest question to answer is, well, how do I? So let's say I do that. How do I know if I need to do it again? Heaven forbid. We spend big time money putting this. I'm telling you, use a full rate of my fungicide treatment. Not counting adjuvants, not counting fertilizer, not counting insecticide if I choose to put it in, which I probably won't, not counting application, will be $30. And some of you are thinking, well, that guy's obviously got a good off-farm job and he don't care if he's making money raising corn. That's not true. I do like to make money raising corn. But a full label rate of a premium product is going to be in the neighborhood of $30 for the product. And then you're going to add all the other stuff to that. So, I mean, you got to put your big boy pants on to be willing to do that. And maybe that's not necessary. I think there's reasons to think it might be necessary. And so I'm going to be loaded for bear on my first application at Tassel for tar spot. And then I'm going to go look at about 2 to 3 weeks later, after I make that application, I'm going to go find some farmer that doesn't believe in fungicide, and I'm going to sneak into his cornfield and I'm going to see what it looks like. And if you walk into unsprayed corn in late July or early August and it looks like a dumpster fire, I would strongly consider retreating your corn that hopefully still looks beautiful, because we did a good job preventing tar spot. Because no matter what rate you use of what product you use, you're going to get 2 to 3 weeks worth of residual control on tar spot. And that will not get you to black layer. And if your solution to that is, well, I'm going to wait till brown silk, that still won't get you to black layer. And you've let half your plant already get infected with tar spot before you sprayed your fungicide. So that's not a good idea either. So, the best recommendation I can give you to decide whether, and I'll use last year as an example. When I walked unsprayed corn last year, it was so clean, it made me wonder if I needed to have put fungicide on my corn. And if that's what unsprayed corn looks like, you absolutely do not need to consider making a second application in corn to protect your corn that you've already invested heavily in protecting with the first application you make. But, if you walk into unsprayed corn and you go, whoa, this stuff looks like it might just die, then it might be worth. Now, I don't think you need to spend I don't think you need to do the $30 program again, but you might want to do something. And I'm definitely going to want to do a lot of trials this year on those later applications. And when I say later, I'm talking like R3, R4, not midway through dent. That's too late. You're not, I'm not going to say there's not a benefit to spraying it that late if it's a disaster, because guys that went out and sprayed stuff in 21 really late that looked like a disaster, they got another 20, 25 bushel out of those really late applications in some of those disaster situations. Just basically keeping the plant from dying is all they did. but keeping the plant from dying, added another 20 or 25 bushel to their corn yield, even though they did, what we said would have been, it was too late. It would have been better, earlier, it would have been better corn had we done a better job preventing the disease, but it helped doing what they did. So when it's awful, throwing in the towel and doing nothing is probably not the right decision. But we're better off being proactive, and keeping it from getting to awful is going to be an even better decision. So that's my recommendation on tar spot is we need to do what we need to do to keep it from being awful. And then you don't end up in that situation where, oh man, this looks terrible. What do I do now? Let's try to keep it from looking terrible. The other thing I will say is the resistance of the different hybrids doesn't matter too much at this point, because this is another thing Rachel and I talked about. The different levels of resistance in hybrids kind of impacts how quickly it spreads through the canopy and how quickly it ramps up in a hybrid. It doesn't really prevent the initial infection. All corn is susceptible to tar spot. But the hybrids that are more resistant or tolerant, use whichever. Pathologists hate the word tolerance. They like resistance. We tend to think of resistance like immunity. That's not what resistance means. So we use words like tolerance that make more sense to us. But the hybrids that are more resistant, more tolerant, whatever term you want to use, the tar spot's not going to get as bad in those hybrids, but they still get infected, and they probably get infected about the same time that the susceptible ones do. So if you're out there, walking corn and you're finding tar spot, that doesn't tell you it's a susceptible hybrid. That tells you it's corn, because corn is going to have tar spot in it. And it doesn't matter what hybrid it is, it's going to have tar spot in it. But if it is a more resistant hybrid, it won't get as bad. You might not need that second application. Maybe you could get by with, a more standard rate of a product and rely some on the plant's resistance. But I think that's dangerous, because even the most tar spot resistant hybrid on the market today is pretty damn susceptible to tar spot. Here's the analogy I would use. I think the worst gray leaf spot hybrid you could plant today is more resistant to gray leaf spot than the best tar spot hybrid you could plant today is resistant to tar spot. And tar spot is a lot scarier beast than gray leaf spot is. And that's primarily because corn for 30 plus years has been bred to be more resistant to gray leaf spot because it needed to be, because I don't know when gray leaf spot started to become a bad problem. We were planting a lot of hybrids back then that were, pretty damn susceptible to gray leaf spot. That's not the case anymore. So gray leaf spot hasn't disappeared. We've just increased the level of resistance in hybrids. That's currently being done for tar spot, but that work started about 3 years ago and needs to be done for the next 20 years to get where we're at with gray leaf spot today. So I was going to touch on soybean fungicides just a little bit. So real quick, I will say one thing about soybean fungicides. When you plant your beans early, that late R2 to early R4, which is kind of the sweet spot window for fungicide and soybeans, lasts for weeks. You can literally go to a field, there'll be R2. The next time you go, there'll be R3. The next time you go, they'll be back on R2. One day you might look at them and go, damn, these are almost R4. And then the next time they're R3. That plant's got a lot of growing left to do. These plants, I mean, you can find an inch long pod on a foot tall soybean if you planted them in March. So you've got big pods, you've got blooms, you've got new trifoliates coming out. Just remember this about fungicides. If the leaf is not there yet, you can't protect it with an application. So when your soybeans are knee high and you look at them and go, damn, those things are, late R2, getting close to R3. Well, the plant's not even half grown yet. So I wouldn't get, unless you want to spray fungicide twice in soybeans, which some guys trying to raise 100 bushel soybeans do that. if you want to make 2 applications in soybeans, I would make the first one about now, and then maybe wait till R4-ish to do the second one. So if you want to do a 2-shot program, go ahead and get that first one on, here relatively soon. But if you're going to spray fungicide one time in soybeans, and with the money you're going to spend spraying fungicide in corn, you're probably not going to spray soybeans more than once, most of you. I wouldn't get in a big hurry to get that R3 application on. I'd let that soybean plant get bigger to where you're protecting most of the plant from that application. And that window is pretty wide in soybeans, especially when you plant them early. Because when you plant them early, they start blooming earlier, they start setting pods earlier, they got a lot of growing left to do, and they keep putting on new trifoliates. So you keep adding trifoliates, and that's why even though the bottom part of the plant is maturing and progressing, and you've got pods higher on the plant, you've also added 2 more new trifoliates. And so it kind of keeps going like this, where, it kind of stays in that R2, R3 range for a long time, just because it's got a lot more growing left to do. So anyway, I appreciate the 3 great questions today from my friends, and appreciate all your attention. Hopefully you got something out of today's program. If you have more questions about fungicides and rates and products and adjuvants and carrier volumes and all that kind of specifics, talk to your retail applicator. Talk to Heather, talk to Kurt, talk to Mike Johnson, talk to our CP reps. They can help give you guidance on that stuff. But again, my main things on fungicide and corn: be timely, and a big part of being timely is to predict when the field's going to tassel. Don't wait till it's tasseling and tell somebody it needs sprayed. I'm going to try to predict, okay, this field's 2 leaves from tassel. If you've still got 2 leaves wrapped around the tassel, in a week, that field's going to be tasseling. So tell somebody now, I want this field sprayed a week from now. Get it on the list. Don't wait till it's ready to put it on the list. Predict when it's going to be ready and put it on the list for that date. And so help your applicators plan ahead. That will make applications more timely. Try to get it on at tassel. If you're shooting for tassel, you're going to get it on, while it's still green silk. Do not shoot for brown silk. One quick obnoxious comment: if you work with a different seed company that is recommending brown silk applications in corn, please do that to their corn, but don't do it to mine. I encourage people mismanaging other people's corn all the time, but don't treat your DeKalb that way just because somebody else wanted theirs done that way. I don't think theirs should be done that way either. I think they might learn that this year too. But get your fungicide applied, use the best products, use full rates, get good coverage, get it on timely. And then after that, we'll evaluate, see where we're at, and make decisions on, is more necessary or are we good at that point? So with that, I'll let you go today. Sorry, we went a little bit long here, but thanks for sticking around. Stay cool. It's miserable out there, especially if you're an old fat guy, and try to stay hydrated. And we'll be back with you in 2 weeks, which I think is like July 10th. Is that right?
Yes.
I think I saw that.
Yes.
So I think we'll be back with you July 10th for our next episode, and everybody stay safe.